In a world where giants tower over men and fear grips armies, one young shepherd boy dares to face the impossible with nothing but a sling and a stone, proving that courage and faith can topple even the mightiest foes. Welcome to Mindful Musing, a journey with God, where faith comes alive, and every story reminds us that the God of yesterday is still the God of today. Here, we dive deep into the untold wonders of Scripture, immersive, emotional, powerful. Stories that stir your spirit, ignite your faith, and draw you closer to the heart of God. Subscribe now and join the journey, as we step into one of the most astonishing moments in all of biblical history. The Philistine army, led by the towering warrior Goliath, challenges the Israelites to send forth a champion to settle the battle in single combat. For 40 days, the giants' taunts echo across the valley, striking fear into the hearts of Israel's soldiers. Amidst this despair, David, a humble shepherd boy tending his father's sheep, arrives at the battlefield, unaware that destiny is calling him to an extraordinary feat. Armed with faith, quick wit, and a sling, David steps forward to confront Goliath, setting the stage for a timeless story of bravery, faith, and the triumph of the underdog. The sun rose over the valley of Elah, casting long shadows across the rugged hills and rocky plains where two armies stood poised for battle. On one side, the Philistine army, fierce and proud, camped with confidence. Their banners fluttered in the morning breeze, and the clanging of armor and the murmur of voices echoed through the air. On the other side, the Israelites gathered, their faces marked by worry and uncertainty. The tension was thick, as if the very earth held its breath. At the heart of the Philistine camp stood a figure that dwarfed all others, a giant among men. Goliath of Gath, a warrior whose name alone sent shivers through the ranks of Israel. Towering over 9 feet tall, clad in heavy bronze armor that gleamed like a burning sun, he was a living mountain of strength and menace. His shield-bearer trudged behind him, carrying a shield so large it could hide a man. Goliath's eyes burned with fierce determination, and his voice, when he spoke, rolled like thunder across the valley. For 40 days, he bellowed, "I have come forward morning and evening to challenge the armies of Israel. Send me a man who will fight me. If he kills me, we will become your servants. But if I kill him, you will serve us." The challenge was clear, and the stakes were high. The Philistines believed that one man could decide the fate of the entire battle. The Israelite soldiers, however, were frozen in fear. No one dared to step forward. Each day, they heard Goliath's taunts, and each day their courage dwindled. King Saul, the leader of Israel, paced nervously in his tent. His warriors were strong, but none could match the giant's strength. The king's heart was heavy with worry. He knew that if no one answered Goliath's challenge, the morale of his army would shatter completely. In the camp, whispers spread like wildfire. Some said Goliath was invincible, a living god of war sent to crush Israel. Others spoke of his terrifying armor, the helmet that covered his head, the coat of mail weighing over 100 pounds, and the spear with a shaft like a weaver's beam, tipped with an iron point so large it took a whole man to carry it. Yet, despite the fear, the Israelites held on to a fragile hope. They remembered their God, the God of their ancestors, who had delivered them from Egypt and parted the Red Sea. But hope alone was not enough to face a giant. On the outskirts of the Israelite camp, away from the noise and tension, a young boy tended sheep. David, the youngest son of Jesse from Bethlehem, was not a soldier. He was a shepherd, accustomed to the quiet hills and the company of his flock. His hands were calloused from slinging stones at lions and bears that threatened his sheep. His heart was full of faith and courage, though he was unaware that his life was about to change forever. David's father sent him to the battlefield with a simple task, to bring food to his older brothers who were soldiers in Saul's army. As David approached the camp, he heard the booming voice of Goliath. The giant's words cut through the air like a sword, mocking the Israelites and challenging them to send a champion. The soldiers around David looked downcast and afraid. Even his brothers were silent, their faces pale with fear. But David's spirit was stirred, not by fear, but by a fierce determination. How could this giant defy the armies of the living God? How could no one stand up to him? David's heart beat faster. He asked the men around him, "Who is this Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" The men told him stories of Goliath's size and strength, of his armor and weapons, and how no one had dared to fight him. But David was not discouraged. He remembered the times he had faced wild animals to protect his sheep. He believed that God who had saved him then would save him now. Word of David's boldness reached King Saul. The king summoned the young shepherd boy before him, surprised that someone so young would volunteer to face the giant. "You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him," Saul said. "You are only a boy, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David was undeterred. He told Saul of his past victories over lions and bears, how God had delivered him from their claws. "The Lord who saved me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will save me from this Philistine," David declared confidently. Saul looked at David, seeing not just a boy but a spark of something greater: faith, courage, and an unshakable spirit. He agreed to let David go, offering his own armor for protection. But David, unused to the heavy armor, chose instead to face Goliath with his sling and 5 smooth stones he picked from a nearby stream. As David stepped onto the battlefield, the armies fell silent. The giant laughed when he saw the boy approaching, mocking him with scorn. "Am I a dog, that you come at me with sticks?" Goliath roared. But David stood firm. He said, "You come against me with sword and spear, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." The stage was set for a battle unlike any other, a battle not just of strength, but of faith and courage. The giant and the shepherd boy faced each other across the valley, the fate of 2 nations hanging in the balance. In that moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see if the underdog could truly triumph over the giant. In the quiet hills surrounding Bethlehem, far from the clamor of armies and the weight of crowns, lived a boy named David. He was the youngest son of Jesse, a man respected in their town but burdened with many sons to care for. David was not like his older brothers, tall, strong, and trained for battle or leadership. Instead, he was a shepherd, entrusted with the humble yet vital task of tending his father's sheep. David's days were spent in the open air, under the vast expanse of sky, where the sun painted the hills golden and the stars whispered ancient secrets at night. He knew each sheep as if it were a dear friend, calling them by name and watching over them with a fierce and tender devotion. When a lamb grew tired or lost its way, David would carry it on his shoulders or wrap it safely in the folds of his cloak. He led his flock to the greenest pastures and the freshest streams, always mindful of their needs. But being a shepherd was not merely about care and kindness. It was a role that demanded courage and vigilance. The wilderness was full of dangers: lions prowled in the shadows, bears lurked near the water, and thieves sometimes sought to steal the flock. David faced these threats alone, armed only with his sling, a simple weapon he had mastered through countless hours of practice. He learned to aim with precision, to swing the sling so that the stone would fly true and strike the target exactly where he intended. More than once, David had fought off wild beasts to protect his sheep. When a lion lunged at a lamb, David did not hesitate. With swift hands and steady heart, he struck the beast down. When a bear tried to snatch a lamb, David confronted it boldly, defending his flock with the strength of a lion himself. These battles were not just fights for survival, they were lessons in faith and trust. David knew that God was watching over him, guiding his hand and guarding his life. Though he was the youngest and often overlooked by his family, David's spirit was unyielding. His brothers were warriors, preparing for battle against the Philistines, but David's battlefield was the hillside, and his victories were silent and unseen. Yet, in the solitude of the fields, David grew strong in body and spirit. His heart was tuned to a higher purpose, and his faith deepened with every starry night spent alone with God. David's life as a shepherd was more than a job, it was a training ground for what was to come. The skills he honed in the wilderness, the courage he summoned against fierce beasts, and the faith he nurtured in God's protection were shaping him into a man ready for a destiny far beyond the hills of Bethlehem. One day, as David tended the flock, a stir of excitement rippled through the town. Word spread that the Philistine army was camped nearby, challenging the Israelites to battle. The giant warrior Goliath, a man of terrifying size and strength, had issued a challenge that no Israelite dared accept. The people were afraid, and the soldiers' hearts wavered. David's father, Jesse, called him home briefly, then sent him with food to the Israelite camp where his brothers were stationed. David obeyed, leaving his sheep in the care of a trusted keeper. As he approached the camp, the sounds of war drums and shouted commands filled the air, but David's mind was fixed not on fear but on faith. At the camp, David heard the giants' taunts echoing across the valley. The soldiers cowered, but David's heart burned with a quiet fire. He could not understand how a man could defy the armies of the living God and go unchallenged. His faith told him that God's power was greater than any giant, and that courage born of trust in God could overcome the greatest obstacles. David's boldness surprised many. When he offered to fight Goliath, the king and the soldiers doubted him. How could a boy, untrained in war and unarmored, face a seasoned giant? But David spoke of his past victories over lions and bears, of how God had delivered him then and would deliver him now. His words were not just bravado, they were the confident testimony of a boy who had learned to rely on God's strength rather than his own. Rejecting the heavy armor offered by King Saul, David chose instead his sling and 5 smooth stones from a nearby stream. He trusted in the skill he had practiced and the God who had protected him in the wilderness. With steady hands and a fearless heart, David stepped onto the battlefield, ready to face the giant. David's story as a shepherd is a story of preparation and promise. Though he was young and seemingly insignificant, his time in the fields had forged him into a warrior of faith. The quiet hours spent caring for sheep, the battles fought against wild beasts, and the nights of prayer and worship had all been steps on the path to greatness. This chapter of David's life reminds us that greatness often begins in humble places. It is in the ordinary tasks, the unseen struggles, and the faithful obedience that character is built. David's journey from shepherd boy to mighty warrior shows us that God uses the small and the overlooked to accomplish extraordinary things. As David faced the giant, he carried not just stones in his pouch but the strength of his past and the faith that had sustained him. His story is a beacon of hope for all who feel small or unprepared, a testament that with courage and trust in God, even the mightiest challenges can be overcome. The air in the Israelite camp was thick with tension and fear. For days, the soldiers had heard the booming voice of Goliath echoing across the valley, mocking them and challenging any man to face him in single combat. Yet no one had dared to answer. The giant's size and strength were terrifying, and the soldiers' hearts were heavy with dread. Amidst this atmosphere of despair, a young shepherd boy named David arrived at the camp. He had come from Bethlehem, sent by his father Jesse to bring food to his older brothers who were serving in King Saul's army. As David approached the camp, the sounds of clanging armor and murmurs of fear filled the air. His brothers were among the soldiers, but their faces were drawn and anxious, weighed down by the giant's challenge. David's presence was a breath of fresh air in the grim camp. His youthful energy and calm confidence stood in stark contrast to the soldiers' unease. As he handed bread and supplies to his brothers, he overheard the soldiers speaking in hushed tones about the giant who defied Israel and their God. Who was this Goliath that he should defy the armies of the living God? David asked, his voice steady but filled with curiosity. His brothers looked at him with a mixture of surprise and skepticism. He is a giant from Gath, one replied. He stands over 9 feet tall, covered in bronze armor. No one has dared to fight him, and the army is paralyzed with fear. But David was undeterred. He had faced dangers before, lions and bears that threatened his father's sheep, and he trusted that the God who protected him then would protect him now. His heart burned with a quiet determination that something had to be done. Word of David's questions and boldness soon reached King Saul. The king, weary and troubled, summoned David to his tent. You are not able to go out against this Philistine to fight him, Saul said, looking down at the boy. You are only a youth, and he has been a warrior from his youth. David met Saul's gaze without hesitation. Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep, he said. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. Saul was struck by the boy's faith and courage. Though he still had doubts, he said, Go, and the Lord be with you. Saul then offered David his own armor, a bronze helmet, a coat of mail, and a sword. But the armor was heavy and unfamiliar to David. He tried to walk in it but stumbled and felt constrained. I cannot go in these, he said, because I am not used to them. So he took off the armor, choosing instead to face Goliath with the simple tools he knew best. David took up his shepherd's staff, selected 5 smooth stones from a nearby stream, and placed them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag. With his sling in hand, he approached the battlefield where the giant waited. The soldiers watched in disbelief as the small boy stepped forward. Goliath, noticing David, sneered and mocked him. Am I a dog, that you come at me with sticks? He roared. Come here, and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals. But David was unshaken. He replied boldly, You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This very day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. This day the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. With those words, David ran toward Goliath, swinging his sling. A single stone flew from the sling, striking the giant's forehead with unerring accuracy. Goliath staggered, then fell face down to the ground. David ran to him, took Goliath's own sword, and cut off his head. The Philistine army, seeing their champion defeated by a boy, fled in panic. The Israelites cheered, their fear replaced by hope and courage. David's faith and bravery had turned the tide of battle. This reveals the power of faith and courage in the face of overwhelming odds. David's willingness to step forward when others hesitated shows that true strength comes not from size or weapons but from trust in God and conviction in one's purpose. His story inspires all who feel small or powerless to believe that with faith, they too can overcome giants. The morning sun cast a golden glow over the valley of Elah as the two armies faced each other across the rocky expanse. The tension was palpable, 40 days of standoff, 40 days of fear and silence from the Israelite camp. The Philistines, confident and loud, had their champion, Goliath, standing tall and defiant, his bronze armor glinting in the sunlight. His thunderous challenges echoed through the valley, daring the Israelites to send a warrior to face him. Yet no one answered. Among the Israelites, the mood was grim. Soldiers whispered in hushed tones, their eyes cast downward or fixed nervously on the giant. King Saul sat in his tent, troubled and uncertain. The army's morale was broken, and the hope of victory seemed distant. Into this scene stepped David, the young shepherd boy from Bethlehem, whose faith burned brighter than any fear. Though small and unarmed by the standards of war, David's heart was filled with a conviction that the Lord would deliver Israel. He had witnessed God's protection in the wilderness, defending his sheep from lions and bears. This same God would not abandon his people now. When David first offered to fight Goliath, many scoffed. His brothers were angry and dismissive, telling him to return to tending sheep. Even King Saul was skeptical. You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight him, Saul said. You are only a youth, and he has been a warrior from his youth. But David's resolve did not waver. He recounted to Saul the times when he had faced wild beasts threatening his flock. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by the hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God." David's words were not just bravado. They were a testament to his faith. "The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine," he declared confidently. Saul, moved by David's faith, agreed to let him face Goliath. He offered David his own armor, a bronze helmet, a coat of mail, and a sword. But the armor was heavy and unfamiliar. David tried to walk in it but stumbled, feeling constrained and burdened. "I cannot go in these," he said, "because I am not used to them." So he removed the armor, choosing instead to rely on the skills and tools he had always known. David took his shepherd's staff, selected 5 smooth stones from a nearby stream, and placed them carefully in his shepherd's pouch. With his sling in hand, he approached the battlefield, his heart steady and his faith unshaken. As David stepped forward, Goliath noticed him and sneered with contempt. "Am I a dog, that you come at me with sticks?" he roared. "Come here, and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals." But David was undeterred. He shouted back with a voice ringing with conviction, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This very day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. This day the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." The armies fell silent, watching the improbable scene unfold, the shepherd boy facing the giant warrior. David ran quickly toward Goliath, swinging his sling with practiced skill. A single stone flew from the sling, striking Goliath in the center of his forehead. The giant staggered, then fell face down to the ground, motionless. Without hesitation, David ran to the fallen giant, drew Goliath's own sword from its sheath, and with a swift stroke, cut off the giant's head. The Philistine army, seeing their champion defeated by a boy, was thrown into chaos. Fear and panic swept through their ranks, and they fled the battlefield. The Israelite soldiers, emboldened by David's victory, raised a mighty battle cry and pursued the fleeing enemy as far as Gath and Ekron. The bodies of the Philistines were scattered along the roads, and the Israelites plundered the enemy camp. David's triumph was not just a military victory, it was a powerful demonstration of faith and courage. Against all odds, the underdog had prevailed, not by might or armor, but by trusting in the Lord. When the battle ended, David took Goliath's armor and brought the giant's severed head to Jerusalem. King Saul sent his commander Abner to bring the boy to him. Saul asked, "Whose son are you, young man?" David answered simply, "I am the son of your servant Jesse the Bethlehemite." This victory marked the beginning of David's rise, a journey from shepherd boy to leader of Israel. It was a story that would be told for generations, inspiring countless others to face their giants with faith and courage. The valley lay silent, the air thick with anticipation. On one side stood the massive Philistine army, their champion Goliath towering above all, clad in heavy bronze armor that gleamed menacingly in the sunlight. On the other side, the Israelite camp watched with bated breath, their hearts heavy with fear and doubt. For 40 days, Goliath had challenged the Israelites, mocking their God and daring any man to face him. Yet no one had answered. Into this charged silence stepped David, the young shepherd boy, small in stature but mighty in faith. He approached the battlefield without armor or sword, carrying only his sling and a pouch of 5 smooth stones. His eyes were fixed on the giant, his heart steady with trust in the Lord. Goliath looked David up and down with scorn. "Am I a dog," he sneered, "that you come at me with sticks?" He cursed David by the names of his gods and threatened to feed his flesh to the birds and wild animals. The giant's voice thundered across the valley, meant to intimidate and terrify. But David's reply rang clear and fearless. You come against me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. The battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. With those words, David ran toward Goliath, his sling swinging in his hand. He reached into his pouch, took out a stone, and hurled it with practiced precision. The stone flew through the air, striking Goliath squarely in the forehead. The giant staggered, then fell face down to the ground, motionless. David did not hesitate. He ran to the fallen giant, drew Goliath's own sword, and with a swift stroke, cut off the giant's head. The Philistine army, seeing their champion defeated by a mere boy, was thrown into chaos. They fled in panic, and the Israelites pursued them, their fear replaced by courage and hope. This moment was more than a battle won, it was a testament to faith, courage, and the power of God working through the unlikely. David's victory showed that true strength comes not from armor or weapons but from trust in the Lord. As the dust settled, David carried Goliath's head to Jerusalem, a symbol of triumph and divine favor. King Saul sent his commander to bring the boy to him, asking, "Whose son are you, young man?" David answered simply, "I am the son of your servant Jesse the Bethlehemite." The story of David and Goliath became a beacon of hope for generations, reminding all that with faith, even the smallest and weakest can overcome the greatest giants. This follows the biblical narrative closely, emphasizing David's courage, faith, and the dramatic showdown with Goliath. It aligns with your interest in immersive, underdog storytelling and sets the stage for David's rise. The valley, once filled with the thunderous voice of Goliath and the tense silence of the Israelite camp, now echoed with the triumphant cries of victory. David, the young shepherd boy who had faced the giant with nothing but a sling and stones, stood at the center of a battlefield transformed. The mighty Philistine army was in full retreat, their confidence shattered by the fall of their champion. David's heart pounded not with pride, but with awe and gratitude. He knew this victory was not his alone, it was the work of the Lord, the God who had delivered him from lions and bears, and now from the hand of a giant. The soldiers of Israel, once paralyzed by fear, now surged forward with renewed courage, chasing the fleeing enemy as far as Gath and Ekron. King Saul, who had watched the battle from his tent with a mixture of hope and doubt, now rose to his feet in astonishment and joy. He sent his commander, Abner, to bring the victorious boy to him. When David approached, Saul looked at him with a new respect, recognizing that this shepherd was no ordinary youth. "Whose son are you, young man?" Saul asked, curiosity and admiration mingling in his voice. David answered simply, "I am the son of your servant Jesse the Bethlehemite." News of David's victory spread quickly throughout Israel and beyond. The people celebrated not only the defeat of Goliath but the courage and faith that had made it possible. Songs were sung, and stories told around campfires and in marketplaces, inspiring all who heard them. Yet, amid the celebration, David remained humble. He returned to his duties as a shepherd, knowing that his journey was just beginning. The victory had opened a new chapter in his life, one filled with challenges and opportunities, but also with the steady presence of God's guidance. The story of David and Goliath became a timeless symbol of hope. That even the smallest and weakest, armed with faith and courage, can overcome the greatest obstacles. It reminded the Israelites and all who heard it that true strength comes not from weapons or size, but from trust in the Lord. As the sun set over the valley of Elah, casting long shadows over the land, David looked toward the horizon with a heart full of faith and a spirit ready for whatever lay ahead. David's victory over Goliath was celebrated throughout Israel, and his fame spread like wildfire. Songs were sung in his honor, and the people praised him as a hero. Yet, amid the cheers and celebrations, a darker shadow began to fall, one cast by the very king who had once welcomed him. King Saul, who had initially taken David under his wing, now found his heart troubled by jealousy and fear. The women's joyful songs rang in his ears, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. What once was a source of pride now became a painful reminder that David's rising popularity threatened Saul's throne. Saul's mind was restless. He saw David not just as a brave warrior but as a rival destined to take his crown. The Lord had already rejected Saul as king because of his disobedience, and David had been anointed by the prophet Samuel to be his successor. Yet Saul clung to power, his fear twisting into bitterness and hatred. One day, as David played his lyre to soothe Saul's troubled spirit, Saul's jealousy boiled over. A dark, tormenting spirit from God came upon Saul, and in a sudden rage, Saul grabbed his spear and hurled it at David, intending to pin him to the wall. But David, quick and alert, dodged the spear twice, escaping unharmed. Despite this, Saul's fear did not abate. He removed David from his presence but appointed him commander over 1,000 men, hoping to keep him close yet controlled. David led the troops with wisdom and courage, winning victory after victory. The Lord was with David, blessing his every endeavor. The people loved David for his bravery and leadership, and their loyalty only deepened Saul's jealousy. Yet David remained loyal to Saul, respecting him as the Lord's anointed king. Even when Saul sought to kill him, David refused to harm the man God had chosen. Their relationship became a complex dance of loyalty and suspicion, honor and fear. David gathered a band of followers and moved from place to place, always aware of Saul's pursuit but never giving in to hatred or revenge. In one remarkable moment, David and his men hid in a cave where Saul came to rest. David's men urged him to kill Saul, but David refused, cutting only a corner of Saul's robe as a sign that he could have taken his life but chose not to. When Saul discovered this, he was moved to tears and acknowledged David's righteousness. The wilderness was quiet except for the soft rustling of the wind through the rocky hills. David and his men had been on the run for many days, moving from place to place to evade King Saul's relentless pursuit. Saul, once a proud king, was now consumed by jealousy and fear, determined to capture or kill the young man who had become a hero to Israel. One day, David learned that Saul and his army were encamped nearby, resting in a cave to relieve themselves. It was a moment that could change everything. David's men saw the opportunity clearly. "This is the day the Lord promised you," they said. "He will give your enemy into your hands. Now is your chance to strike." But David's heart was heavy. He knew Saul was the Lord's anointed king, chosen by God, even if Saul had turned against him. To harm Saul would be to oppose God's will. With quiet resolve, David crept into the cave where Saul slept, accompanied by his loyal companion Abishai. The cave was dark and silent except for the heavy breathing of the king and the guards nearby. David moved carefully, and with a swift motion, he cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Then he and Abishai slipped away into the shadows. When Saul awoke and discovered the torn robe, he was shaken. He called out to his men, "Who has done this?" They answered, "David is not far from here." Saul's voice trembled as he spoke to David, "My son, why do you treat me this way? Why do you harm me when I have done you no wrong? You have just now spared my life, may the Lord reward you for that." David replied respectfully, "I would never harm the Lord's anointed. As surely as the Lord lives, if anyone but you had been found in that cave, I would have destroyed him. But you are the king, the Lord's anointed. So take this corner of your robe that I cut off as a sign that I could have harmed you but chose not to." Saul was moved by David's mercy and integrity. For a moment, the king's jealousy and hatred softened, and he acknowledged David's righteousness. "You are more righteous than I," he said. "You have treated me well, but I have treated you badly. Now I know that you will surely be king." Despite this moment of peace, the tension between them remained. Saul left the cave, and David and his men continued their flight, aware that the struggle for Israel's future was far from over. This chapter reveals the profound strength of mercy and respect for God's timing. David's choice to spare Saul, even when he had the chance to end his enemy, shows a character rooted in faith and honor. It highlights the complex relationship between the two men, one marked by fear and jealousy, the other by patience and trust in God's plan. The wilderness was quiet except for the soft rustling of the wind through the rocky hills. David and his men had been on the run for many days, moving from place to place to evade King Saul's relentless pursuit. Saul, once a proud king, was now consumed by jealousy and fear, determined to capture or kill the young man who had become a hero to Israel. One day, David learned that Saul and his army were encamped nearby, resting in a cave to relieve themselves. It was a moment that could change everything. David's men saw the opportunity clearly. "This is the day the Lord promised you," they said. "He will give your enemy into your hands. Now is your chance to strike." But David's heart was heavy. He knew Saul was the Lord's anointed king, chosen by God, even if Saul had turned against him. To harm Saul would be to oppose God's will. With quiet resolve, David crept into the cave where Saul slept, accompanied by his loyal companion Abishai. The cave was dark and silent except for the heavy breathing of the king and the guards nearby. David moved carefully, and with a swift motion, he cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Then he and Abishai slipped away into the shadows. When Saul awoke and discovered the torn robe, he was shaken. He called out to his men, "Who has done this?" They answered, "David is not far from here." Saul's voice trembled as he spoke to David, "My son, why do you treat me this way? Why do you harm me when I have done you no wrong? You have just now spared my life, may the Lord reward you for that." David replied respectfully, "I would never harm the Lord's anointed. As surely as the Lord lives, if anyone but you had been found in that cave, I would have destroyed him. But you are the king, the Lord's anointed. So take this corner of your robe that I cut off as a sign that I could have harmed you but chose not to." Saul was moved by David's mercy and integrity. For a moment, the king's jealousy and hatred softened, and he acknowledged David's righteousness. "You are more righteous than I," he said. "You have treated me well, but I have treated you badly. Now I know that you will surely be king." Despite this moment of peace, the tension between them remained. Saul left the cave, and David and his men continued their flight, aware that the struggle for Israel's future was far from over. This chapter reveals the profound strength of mercy and respect for God's timing. David's choice to spare Saul, even when he had the chance to end his enemy, shows a character rooted in faith and honor. It highlights the complex relationship between the two men, one marked by fear and jealousy, the other by patience and trust in God's plan. The story of David and Goliath is more than a tale of a boy defeating a giant. It is a timeless testament to the power of faith, courage, and integrity. David's journey from a humble shepherd to the king of Israel reminds us that true strength does not come from size or weapons but from trusting in a higher purpose and standing firm in the face of fear. His mercy toward Saul teaches us the value of respect and patience, even amid rivalry and hardship. This story continues to inspire generations to believe that with faith and determination, no giant is too big to overcome. As we close this chapter on David's incredible journey, let us carry forward the lessons of bravery, humility, and unwavering faith. Whether facing personal challenges or standing up for what is right, David's example shows us that courage and trust in God can lead to triumph against all odds. Remember, every giant you face is an opportunity to grow stronger and shine brighter. Reflect on the giants in your own life. Fear, doubt, or obstacles that seem insurmountable. Like David, choose faith over fear and courage over hesitation. Take one small step today toward facing your giant, trusting that with determination and faith, victory is within reach. Share this story with others who need encouragement, and let David's legacy inspire a new generation of fearless hearts.